Hey everyone, and welcome to another deep dive. Today we're looking into something that's pretty relevant to all of us, I think.
Definitely.
Data and technology.
Yeah.
But with a bit of a twist.
Mm-hmm.
We're going to be looking at how these things can actually be biased against certain groups of people.
It's true. And I think a lot of times we think of these things as neutral, AI and algorithms just
Right.
kind of doing their thing.
Right.
But they actually reflect and can amplify existing inequalities in our society, particularly around gender and LGBTQ plus identities.
So you're telling me, like, my phone is low-key prejudiced?
It's a possibility, yeah.
That's kind of unsettling.
It is unsettling, and that's why this deep dive is so important.
Yeah.
We're going to be drawing on an academic essay that goes into these issues.
Okay.
And it uses some familiar thinkers like Karl Marx,
Okay.
Judith Butler,
Gotcha.
and it also brings in some contemporary research that shows that this is a very real problem.
All right, so let's unpack this a bit. What does Karl Marx have to do with my smartphone?
Well, Marx had this idea that tools that we create, like hammers or smartphones,
Okay.
they're not neutral objects.
Right.
They actually reflect the power dynamics of the society that created them.
Okay.
So in a way, our technology can be seen as like a mirror, reflecting our biases.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
But how does this, play out in the real world?
So one example that the essay explores
Okay.
is the history of women in computing.
Okay.
Now, you might know Ada Lovelace considered the first computer programmer.
Right.
But what's really fascinating is that during the 1930s and World War II,
Uh-huh.
women were actually key players in this whole field.
Really?
They were operating machines, developing algorithms, really running the show.
So why don't we hear more about these women?
That's the thing. As the field gained prestige and became more professionalized,
Yeah.
it also became masculinized.
Oh, wow.
Women were kind of systematically pushed out and their contributions were minimized or erased. It's like the power dynamic shifted and technology became associated with men.
So even way back then, the biases of society were shaping who got to be seen as, the face of technology.
Exactly.
And that brings us to AI today, right?
Yeah.
Like
yeah.
virtual assistants and stuff.
Exactly. Think about Siri,
Right.
Alexa,
Yeah.
all those helpful voices.
Yeah.
Why are they almost always female?
That's true.
And why are they designed to sound so helpful, even subservient?
I never really thought about it before, but
Yeah.
yeah, you're right. It's like they're playing the role of a secretary or an assistant, always there to help.
The essay argues that this reinforces traditional gender roles.
Oh, interesting.
We subconsciously associate women with caregiving service helpfulness,
Right.
and that gets programmed into these AI systems.
Yeah.
It's almost like those old sci-fi movies where the robots are always serving humans and they're almost always female robots.
It's kind of disturbing when you think about it like that.
It is, yeah.
So it's not just the voices, right?
Heh.
Like the algorithms themselves are learning to see women in these limited stereotypical ways.
Right, and the essay highlights research
Okay.
that shows AI often associates women with domestic tasks, like cooking, cleaning, shopping,
Right.
reinforcing those stereotypes even further.
So AI is basically learning to be sexist from the data it's given.
In a way, yes. And this is where Judith Butler's theory of gender performativity comes in.
Okay.
Butler argues that gender isn't something we're born with. It's
Yeah.
something we perform through our actions, our behaviors, and how we present ourselves to the world.
Right. I remember learning about that.
Yeah.
But how does this relate to AI?
Well, AI often struggles with the fluidity of gender.
Okay.
It tends to rely on very rigid categories of male and female,
Right.
which don't reflect the complexity of gender identity. So someone who doesn't fit neatly into those categories
Right.
might be misgendered or misunderstood by AI systems.
That makes a lot of sense. So AI is kind of stuck in this old-fashioned way of thinking about gender, which can have real-world consequences for how people are treated.
Exactly.
Okay. So we've seen how AI can be biased against women and how it can be biased against LGBTQ plus people. Give me an example of that.
Well, there's a story of Bobby Duncan, a college student who was essentially outed by a Facebook algorithm.
Really?
Yeah, her name was added to her university's Queer Chorus Facebook page
Uh-huh.
without her consent,
Wow.
even though she had strict privacy settings. A glitch in the algorithm shared this information with her entire network,
Wow.
revealing her sexual orientation to people that she wasn't ready to tell.
That's a powerful example of how these seemingly neutral technologies can have really personal and damaging consequences. It's scary to think that something like a Facebook algorithm could out someone against their will.
It is scary, and Bobby's experience ties into a bigger issue that the essay highlights this concept of heteronormativity in AI systems.
It's just hetero what now?
It's a mouthful. I know.
Yeah.
Basically, what it means is that AI is often built with the assumption that everyone is straight and cisgender.
Right.
So LGBTQ plus identities and experiences are either ignored or treated as deviations from the norm.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
And I'm guessing that leads to problems for LGBTQ plus users.
Absolutely. LGBTQ plus content can get flagged as inappropriate or offensive by these automated moderation systems, even if it's not.
Right.
There's also research showing that AI misinterprets LGBTQ plus language, especially reclaimed slurs, words that have been reappropriated by the community as terms of empowerment.
Right.
You know?
And instead of recognizing the context, the AI just shuts down the conversation.
Exactly.
It's like silencing an entire community's voices.
Exactly. And this all stems from the fact that the AI doesn't understand the nuances of LGBTQ plus language and culture. It's like it's stuck in a binary world that doesn't reflect the diversity of human experience.
It sounds like these biases are baked into like the very foundation of how AI is built.
Yeah.
This is heavy stuff. It's making me rethink how I use technology.
And that's the point.
Okay.
The essay is trying to make us aware of how AI can reflect and amplify societal biases.
Yeah.
It's not about demonizing technology,
Right.
but about being mindful of its limitations and its potential for harm.
Okay, so we've seen how AI can be biased against women and LGBTQ plus people.
Yeah.
But how does this algorithmic bias actually widen existing inequalities? Explain it to me like I'm 5.
Okay, so imagine you're teaching a kid to draw a tree.
Uh-huh.
And you show them lots of pictures of trees with brown trunks and green leaves.
Yeah.
Then they see a tree with a white trunk and red leaves.
Uh-huh.
And they think it's not a real tree.
Right.
Because it doesn't look like the ones they've seen before.
Right.
AI is kind of like that kid.
Okay.
It learns from the data it's given.
Yeah.
And if that data is biased,
right.
reflecting existing societal inequalities, then the AI is going to be biased too.
Right. Garbage in, garbage out.
Exactly.
So give me some like real world examples of how this plays out.
One example is hiring algorithms.
Okay.
They've been shown to favor male candidates over female candidates, simply because they're trained on historical data that reflects gender inequality in the workplace.
So even though we're trying to like fight discrimination, AI might actually be making it worse.
It can do,
by perpetuating the same old patterns.
Exactly. And it creates something called an information feedback loop.
Okay.
Where AI learns from biased data, which then reinforces those biases in society.
Right.
And the cycle continues.
Wow.
It's like AI is creating a self-fulfilling prophecy of inequality.
This is really concerning.
It is.
It sounds like AI can have like a huge impact on society, but not always in a good way.
That's right. And that's why it's so important to be aware of these issues.
Yeah.
And to work towards creating more equitable and inclusive AI systems.
Well, this has been an eye-opening deep dive so far.
Good.
I'm definitely starting to see how deeply data technology and inequality are intertwined. But we've only just scratched the surface, haven't we?
We have. Join us next time as we zoom out and consider the broader societal implications of all this, including how AI is not just reflecting society, but actively shaping it.
I'm hooked. See you in part 2. Okay, we're back for part 2 of our deep dive into data technology and inequality. Last time we were talking about how AI can be biased against women and LGBTQ plus people.
Right, and we started to unpack how these biases can actually make existing inequalities even worse.
Yeah, it was pretty mind-blowing to realize that something as seemingly neutral as an algorithm can actually perpetuate discrimination.
Absolutely, and now we're going to zoom out a bit and consider the broader societal implications of all this.
Gotcha.
Because these issues go way beyond just individual cases of bias.
Okay, I'm ready for the big picture. Hit me with it.
Well, the essay argues that AI systems aren't just neutral tools floating out there in the digital ether.
So they're not just like digital hammers or screwdrivers.
Not exactly. They're actually deeply embedded in our social and cultural norms.
Okay.
They reflect our values, our assumptions, and unfortunately our biases.
I'm starting to see that we've been talking about how AI reflects our biases, but what about the flip side? How does AI actually shape our society?
That's a crucial question, and the essay brings up this concept called the data gaze, coined by sociologist David Beer.
Data gaze. That sounds a little creepy.
Well, it kind of is.
Okay.
The idea is that the people and institutions who control data
Uh-huh.
have a huge amount of power to shape how we see the world.
So it's not just about the data itself.
Right.
It's about who gets to collect it, analyze it, and ultimately decide what it means.
Exactly, and that power often reinforces existing power structures. The essay specifically highlights how the data gaze can be used to marginalize certain groups, like women, people of color, and LGBTQ plus individuals.
Can you give me an example of how this works in real life?
Think about how facial recognition technology is used. Studies have shown that these systems are often less accurate at recognizing faces of people with darker skin tones.
Oh, wow. I remember hearing about that.
Yeah.
So that means like these systems could potentially misidentify someone, which could lead to all sorts of problems.
Absolutely. It could lead to wrongful arrests, discrimination in housing or employment, and even violence.
Wow.
And it all stems from the fact that the data used to train these systems wasn't diverse enough.
So it's like the AI is seeing the world through a very narrow lens, one that reflects the biases of its creators.
Exactly. And this brings us to another critical point that the essay raises, the lack of diversity in STEM fields and specifically AI development.
We touched on this earlier with like the history of women in computing.
Right.
But it sounds like this problem is still very much alive today.
It is, according to the Alan Turing Institute. Women make up only 22% of AI and data professionals in the UK.
Wow.
And it's even lower globally.
Those numbers are pretty discouraging. Why is there such a huge gender gap in these fields?
The essay points to a number of factors. Historical discrimination, systemic bias, lack of role models and mentors, and even just a lack of confidence.
Wait, a lack of confidence? You mean women are less confident in their STEM abilities than men?
Unfortunately, that seems to be the case. Research from the Alan Turing Institute found that even though women in AI have a higher level of education than men, they often report feeling less confident in their skills.
That's so frustrating. It's like they're being told they don't belong in these fields even though they're clearly qualified.
Exactly, and it's not just about feelings. There are real barriers that women face in STEM, like toxic work environments, harassment, and even, ironically, algorithmic bias.
Hold on. Algorithmic bias against women in STEM. I thought we were talking about how AI is biased against women in general.
Well, it's kind of a double whammy. Not only is AI often biased against women in society, it can also be biased against women who are trying to work in AI.
So it's like this vicious cycle.
Yeah.
The lack of diversity in AI development leads to biased algorithms. Which then perpetuate the lack of diversity. It's like a snake eating its own tail.
Exactly. And this cycle isn't just limited to gender. People of color and members of the LGBTQ plus community also face significant barriers in STEM fields.
This all paints a pretty bleak picture.
Yeah.
It sounds like we've got a long way to go before we achieve true equity in tech.
We do have a long way to go, but it's not all doom and gloom. There are people and organizations working hard to address these issues and make the tech world more inclusive.
Okay, that gives me some hope. So what can we actually do to make a difference? Where do we even start?
Well, for starters, we need to diversify the pipeline.
Okay.
That means encouraging more young people from underrepresented groups to pursue STEM careers.
So like getting kids excited about science and technology from a young age, regardless of their gender, race, or sexual orientation.
Exactly. We need to show them that there's a place for them in these fields.
Yeah.
And that their voices and perspectives are valued.
That makes a lot of sense. What else can we do?
We also need to create more supportive and inclusive work environments in STEM fields.
So addressing things like harassment, discrimination, and unconscious bias, making sure that everyone feels safe and respected at work.
Absolutely. It's about creating a culture where everyone feels like they belong and can thrive.
This all sounds great in theory.
Yeah.
But how do we actually put these ideas into practice? It seems like such a huge systemic problem.
It is a huge problem, but that doesn't mean we can't make progress.
Okay.
The essay actually highlights some organizations that are doing great work in this area.
Okay.
For example, the Alan Turing Institute has a whole program dedicated to promoting ethical AI practices and gender inclusivity in the field.
That's good to hear. It sounds like there are people out there who are really committed to making a difference.
There are. And it's not just up to organizations. Individuals can make a difference, too.
Like, what can I do?
Well, you can start by educating yourself about these issues and talking to your friends and family about them. You can also support organizations that are working to promote diversity and inclusion in tech.
Yeah.
And if you're in a position to hire or mentor people, make a conscious effort to seek out and support individuals from underrepresented groups.
Yeah, those are all great ideas. I'm definitely feeling more empowered now.
Good.
It's easy to feel overwhelmed by like the scale of these problems, but it's important to remember that we can all do our part to make a difference.
I completely agree. We all have a role to play in creating a more equitable and just tech world.
This has been another fascinating discussion.
Exactly.
It's amazing how much ground we've covered in just 2 parts.
I know, right? And there's still more to come.
That's right. In the final part of our deep dive, we'll shift our focus to solutions and explore some of the exciting innovations and initiatives that are paving the way for a more inclusive and equitable digital future.
We'll be discussing things like feminist data science, ethical AI guidelines, and the importance of regulation and oversight in the tech industry.
It sounds like a hopeful and inspiring way to wrap up this deep dive.
It definitely is. We'll see you then for part 3.
Welcome back to our final part of this deep dive into data technology and inequality. And, so far we've kind of uncovered some unsettling things.
Yeah, definitely some things to think about.
About how AI can, perpetuate bias and exacerbate these societal issues.
Yeah, and how these historical patterns can get baked into the algorithms and then they have real-world consequences.
Yeah, exactly. And it's been eye-opening, to say the least. But now that we've kind of, dove into all the problems, what can we actually do about it? Is there any hope for a more equitable digital future?
Oh, absolutely there is. Remember, technology is a tool, right? And like any tool, it can be used for good or for bad. And the essay that we've been talking about, it not only highlights these problems, but it also offers some potential solutions.
Okay, good. So give me some reasons to be optimistic.
One promising area is the field of feminist data science.
Feminist data science. Okay, I've never heard of that.
It's pretty new, but it's gaining traction.
Okay.
And essentially, it's about applying a feminist lens to data science.
Okay.
Questioning assumptions, challenging power structures, and advocating for more inclusive and equitable practices.
So it's about recognizing that data isn't neutral.
Exactly.
It's shaped by social and cultural factors, and those can perpetuate inequality.
Exactly. Feminist data scientists are working to identify and mitigate bias in algorithms, develop more inclusive data sets, and create AI systems that are designed to benefit everyone, not just the privileged few.
That sounds really important. How do we put these ideas into practice, though?
It's a big challenge, but there are concrete steps we can take.
For starters, we need to diversify the teams that are developing AI.
Right.
Making sure that women, people of color, members of the LGBTQ plus community have a seat at the table.
Diverse perspectives lead to better solutions.
Exactly. If the people building the AI represent a wider range of backgrounds and experiences, they're more likely to spot and address potential biases.
So it's not just about having good intentions. It's about having a team that can actually see the problem from multiple angles.
Yeah, and we also need to be more intentional about the data we use to train AI.
Right.
Ensuring that it's representative of the diversity of human experience.
So not just feeding AI more data, but feeding it better data.
Exact.
Data that reflects the real world with all its complexities and nuances.
Exactly. And finally, we need to develop clear ethical guidelines for AI development and use guidelines that prioritize fairness, transparency, and accountability.
That sounds crucial.
Yeah.
Can't just rely on tech companies to self-regulate, right? I agree. We need robust regulations and oversight to ensure that AI is used for good, not for harm.
Right.
And those regulations need to be informed by ethical considerations, not just technical ones.
This all sounds promising, but I have to admit, I'm still a bit skeptical.
Sure.
Can we really overcome these deep-seated biases?
It's a daunting challenge, no doubt.
Yeah.
But I believe it's possible. We've seen progress in other areas of social justice.
Right.
And I think we can apply those same principles to AI.
I hope you're right.
Yeah.
What gives you the most hope?
The growing awareness of these issues. More and more people are waking up to the fact that AI isn't neutral.
Yeah.
And that it can have these real-world consequences for marginalized communities.
Right.
And that awareness is leading to action from grassroots activism to policy changes.
So the first step is awareness. Then we can start taking action.
Exactly.
It's like that saying, once you see it, you can't unsee it.
Exactly. And the essay reminds us that technology is a tool.
Right.
It can be used for good or for bad. It's up to us to decide how we want to shape the future.
That's a powerful message.
Mm-hmm.
It's not about like demonizing technology.
Yeah.
It's about using it responsibly and ethically.
Mm-hmm.
It's about making sure that technology serves humanity, not the other way around.
Well said, and I think that's a perfect note to end on.
This has been an incredible deep dive.
Yeah.
I feel like I've learned so much about this, complex interplay between data technology and inequality.
Me too. It's a topic that deserves our continued attention and action.
For sure.
We need to keep learning, questioning,
Right.
and pushing for a more just and equitable digital world.
So to our listeners out there, we encourage you to keep digging deeper
Yes.
into these issues. Read articles, listen to podcasts,
Yeah.
and most importantly, think critically about how technology is shaping your own life and the world around you.
Absolutely.
Don't be afraid to ask questions, challenge assumptions, and demand better from these tech companies and policymakers
Yes.
who are shaping our digital future.
Couldn't have said it better myself.
Because ultimately, it's up to all of us to create a more equitable and just world, both online and offline. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive.
We'll see you next time.